This video is a critique which is considered fair use under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. I do not own any of these clips. This is simply fan-made for entertainment purposes only. American Dad is owned by Seth MacFarlane, Mike Barker, Matt Weitzman, 20th Century Fox, and Fuzzy Door Productions. Enjoy! Basically, since I started doing gem reviews, there have been two shows I've gotten requests for more than anything: The Simpsons and American Dad. I've actually addressed these shows in my Q&A and explained why I hadn't done them yet. But the reason it took me so long to do a top 10 list on either of these shows is that I just didn't watch them religiously like I did the other shows I've done lists on. Now, The Simpsons I'll talk about another day, but as for American Dad, I watched the first 6 seasons of that show before getting hooked onto other shows. And since I wasn't too far behind that show, I decided to watch what I missed while doing other lists and reviews. And now I feel comfortable and knowledgeable enough about this show to do a list on it. Now, I never hated this show. In fact, for the most part, I enjoyed nearly every episode of this show, with only a handful of episodes I didn't enjoy. Now, I am going to add 2 rules to this list. Rule number 1. Since Christmas is only a few months away, and since American Dad actually had multiple good Christmas episodes, I'm only going to put one of them on this list, and the others I'm going to save for solo reviews come Christmas time. And rule number 2, this list won't include any episodes from season 13. I have a little something in mind for that season, as well as every other season of this show after that. But even with that rule, there were 190 episodes for me to choose from, and at least 100 of them I could have put on this list. So this was still a hard list to make. But that's enough of this intro. Let's get this list started. Oh boy, it's swell to say. Number 10. A Smith in the Hand. This is a very interesting episode in my opinion. When Steve's school requires its students to take a sex ed class, Stan, being the over-the-top religious stereotype he is, doesn't approve of it and decides to teach Steve his version of sex ed by showing him propaganda like this.
Whoa, that's messed up.
However, after an accident while teaching Steve a hobby, Stan ends up discovering masturbation, and because Stan's repressed his urges for decades, he ends up shunning away everyone just so he can keep jerking off. And the whole time, he's constantly telling himself that he's simply healing. But when Steve catches Stan in the act, Stan, refusing to take responsibility, goes all PTV and blames television for giving him these urges, and even uses the post hoc fallacy to back up his claim.
Do you think about sex all the time?
Non-stop.
And do you watch TV all the time?
Constantly. Holy cow! You just blew my mind!
See? I knew it wasn't my fault!
What makes this episode so interesting is that it pokes fun at people who preach that you should never pleasure yourself, saying that more than likely these people are hypocrites that probably do it all the time, or they're looking for outside sources to blame for other people doing it. It also explains how it's actually a lot more harmful to repress your urges, as opposed to explore them at an early age. And seeing as a good portion of American Dad viewers are in that age where they're starting to discover their body for the first time, this is actually a really nice lesson to teach, and it's a lesson they executed really well. So remember kids, don't be afraid to jack it.
Jacking it, jacking it, jacking it, jack.
Oh boy, it's swell to say.
Number 9. Dope and Faith. I'm actually very impressed with this episode. I consider this episode the anti-not all dogs go to heaven. When Stan ends up realizing he doesn't have any friends, which really isn't all that surprising, he ends up praying that God bless him with the real friend, and he ends up meeting a man named Brett who shares almost every interest that Stan has. Every interest, that is, except one.
Well, I don't believe in God.
Huh?
Yeah, Stan doesn't take this very well and ends up trying a bunch of different tactics to make Brett become religious, including ruining his place of business and turning his wife gay.
What? When did you become a lesbian?
That is so ignorant. You don't become a lesbian. It's not like someone shot an experimental beam into my head and suddenly I'm gay.
This results in Brett trying to kill himself, and Stan ends up seeing that he was actually wrong to care about Brett's religious choices. And Brett survives but becomes a Satanist. And you know what? Stan still accepts him.
I could only be friends with you if you believed in... Believed in what?
Whatever you want, pal. Whatever you want.
And that is exactly how they needed to end Not All Dogs Go to Heaven. The issue shouldn't be who's right and who's wrong. It should be acceptance. This is a very good message to give to people who view religion this way. That it's not wrong to believe in God or not believe in God. All that matters is you don't try to force someone to follow your religion and accept them for who they are. So yeah, this really is the anti-Not All Dogs Go to Heaven. It doesn't portray all religious people as idiots, it only portrays Stan that way. And he's always been this way, so it's not offensive in the slightest. It's just their main character acting like he always does. It doesn't portray either side as being the one and only correct side, and it delivers its message the way it should. It's really a good episode, and it's one of the episodes I recommend the most.
Oh boy, it's swell to say.
Number 8. Independent movie. When Snot's father dies, Snot decides not to go to the funeral because he was never close with his father and says he barely knew him. But Steve refuses to let him miss the chance to say goodbye to his dad, and they all go on a road trip to Stockton for the funeral. And the episode does this in a way that parodies independent movies.
And like the open road, we are infinite.
Will you shut up?
Throughout this, Snot basically goes through all the stages of grief, starting with denial, getting angry at Steve for trying to help, and then finally breaking down crying, wondering why his dad was never there for him. And what triggers him to break down is a bag of chips that his dad used to give him for breakfast.
Where were you? Where were you? Where were you?
See, me personally, I enjoy a good independent movie. But even I admit there are a lot of cliches in them, like the narrating, the fancy language, the emotional breakdowns, the indie-sounding music, and probably the biggest indie movie cliche of all, being very family-centered. This episode really works hard to parody each and every cliche it can fit in, and another thing I have to give it props for is that it actually made me relate to Snot. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I never really enjoyed Snot. There were quite a few episodes where I just did not enjoy his character. But here, I really got invested in his storyline, and I think that's a pretty big achievement for this show.
I gotta get to this funeral. I gotta move.
Honestly, this is one of the biggest surprises for me from the show. I really am stunned at how much I enjoyed this episode, and I give it a lot of props.
Just drive.
A railroad gypsy took away my vas deferens, but you are bumming me out.
Oh boy, it's swell to say.
Number 7. In Country Club. This episode is filled with a lot of great, memorable moments, and the episode as a whole really stands out to me. When Stan takes Steve to the country club with him for a Vietnam War reenactment, Steve ends up being really good at it, but the reenactment is so goddamn intense that once it's over, Steve suffers a very severe case of PTSD.
It was only in a reenactment.
Oh, then it must be PTWRSD, Post-Traumatic War Reenactment Stress Disorder.
Oh, well, whatever you want to call it. But the way Steve deals with his PTSD...
PTWRSD.
Oh, shut up. The way he deals with his condition is actually a parody of John Rambo's PTSD experience in First Blood. And there's a really nice moment where Stan talks Steve down and apologizes to him for putting too much pressure on him, which is a rare thing to see Stan do.
I did to you what America did to Vietnam. I tried to control you, but no longer. I'm pulling out of you, Steve.
Like I said, this episode has a lot of great moments in it. The war reenactment itself is really intense and entertaining. I mean, hell, it's filled with Rambo parodies. There's a few racist jokes thrown in that don't overstay their welcome and are actually kind of funny. And probably one of the best parts is Steve singing the national anthem. I mean, that's just the cherry on top of this masterpiece sundae.
Oh,
Say, can you see by the dawn's early light, girl, I'm gonna rock you in Freedom Town tonight.
This episode is a really good example of how polished and entertaining the show is. It's definitely one of the episodes I'd recommend watching first.
That's my neighbor's son.
Oh boy, it's swell to say.
Number 6. The Vacation Goo. You know, I'm starting to see a pattern with these season debut episodes. Seems like American Dad has a knack for starting a season off with a bang. In this episode, Francine wants to spend more time with the family, so Stan suggests they take a vacation, and while on vacation, it turns out that Stan has been putting the others in something called Vacation Goo, which simulates a fun vacation without it being real, so he can have some alone time.
Let me get this straight. All of our vacations, the only thing that ever brought this family together, have been a big, fat, fake lie?
Yes! Yes to you and yes to the game.
That is terrible, and yet I still love this damn episode. Francine demands they take a real vacation, but after numerous fake-outs, Francine breaks down and Stan gives in and takes the family on a cruise. Francine, however, is convinced she's in the goo again, and as a result, she ends up jumping overboard and gets the family and one of the counselors stranded on an island, where a group of hunters say they're going to hunt them down like animals in an homage to the most dangerous game.
Here we go!
This, in all honesty, is a very bizarre kind of episode, but god damn, it's so entertaining. It's one of those episodes that goes on so many twists and turns that it just leaves you wanting to see more. It's got a few really dark jokes as well, but they're executed so well that it just leaves you laughing your ass off when they happen. I would definitely call this episode a crazy adventure. You don't know where it's gonna lead you, but you can't help but want to be along for the ride.
Nothing bonds a family like a dark, horrible secret.
Oh boy, it's swell to say.
Number 5. Spring breakup. When Francine starts getting obviously bored with Stan and goes to be with her parents for a week, Stan becomes depressed until Roger throws spring break in his house, and as a result, Stan meets a young spring break chick who finds him funny and interesting.
Hey, have a little hot dog with your ketchup.
Little hot dog with your... You're funny!
And while that's going on, Steve ends up coming the closest he's ever come to losing his virginity to a parody version of Carmen Electra. And he actually has a really funny segment with her where he's the difficult one to have sex with.
Now, if you just call your doctor and have him fax over your medical history, we can get down to business.
I'm willing to have sex with you, and you're not gonna put out until you see my medical records?
That's actually really funny. And what's even more impressive is that it actually works on her. And the reason they explain it working actually makes sense.
I want your virginity, Steve. I don't know why. Maybe because you made me work for it.
Alright, well there's a tip for you guys. Try to make the girl work for it every now and then. Actually, this episode, believe it or not, does a pretty good job talking about relationships and how to keep them working after so much time has passed. Like, there's a really good segment where Francine's mother tells her how marriage and relationships are like a business. Each person needs to compromise something.
But every time he tell that joke, I laugh, because it make him feel good. You laugh at his stupid jokes, he'd tell you your bad dinner tastes good. That what marriage is.
Hell, that also plays into Steve treating losing his virginity as a business. That analogy is all over this episode, and it makes perfect sense. That's another thing American Dad is good at, explaining the real world and how the real world works, but putting it in terms that basically anyone could fully understand.
Have a little coffee with your sugar.
Oh boy, it's swell to say.
Number 4. The American Dad After School Special. As I stated earlier, American Dad tends to do a really good job covering certain topics, as it handles them with dignity, humor, creativity, and very clever writing. And in my opinion, that skill is shown to its fullest potential with this episode. When Steve starts dating a pudgy girl named Debbie, Stan is of course unhappy about it, because, well, he's shallow. And when the family points out that Stan is a little overweight himself, it makes him miserable, and you actually see Stan start trying hard to lose the weight, but strangely, despite him working out a lot, he ends up looking like he's getting fatter, and there's even a few comments about his weight being a problem.
I have no choice but to suspend you until you deal with your weight problem.
But what's creative about this episode is that it's actually portraying anorexia, but it does it by showing you Stan's point of view first. So at first, it's kind of confusing as to why his family keeps telling him he's not fat, when he so obviously appears to be getting fat until they show you what's actually going on.
Look at me!
It's worse than we thought!
I know! I'm a huge tub of lard!
Not only was that one of the few times I got legitimately shocked by a twist in this show, it's also a really smart and unique way of portraying anorexia. Because it starts with Stan's point of view, you already get the gist of how he views himself, and that's enough for everything afterwards to make sense.
Eating disorders are no laughing matter, young lady.
Young lady?
But not only that, it makes a great point about how someone's appearance shouldn't matter as long as they make you happy and you want to be with them.
I don't care if she was fat or thin. She was sweet and beautiful and kind of freaky in a good way.
So you throw that in with the anorexia storyline in the exact same episode, and it's just amazing to me that they covered both those topics so well, with only about 21 minutes runtime. It's very rare that I get legitimately mind blown with the way a Seth MacFarlane cartoon portrays a serious topic, let alone multiple serious topics. But this is by far one of the strongest episodes I've ever seen. It's really one episode you have to appreciate.
If you're happy, I'm happy.
Thanks, Dad.
Oh boy, it's swell to say.
Number 3.
Good morning, USA.
Tearjerker. Yeah, just like Family Guy, I would say Season 4 was American Dad's best season, and this is the crowning achievement of that season. What makes this episode so great, you ask? Well, let me just show you a few clips from its opening.
Oh yeah!
Convinced yet? Great, I don't need to go any further. But I will, because I know that's what you want. Now this episode features the cast of American Dad in this big homage to the James Bond films, mostly Goldfinger. And it's one of the most intense homages ever. Its jokes are clever, its animation is incredible, and it's a surprisingly strong adrenaline rush. Stan is put on an assignment to stop a bad director, played by Klaus, who's actually part of an even bigger scheme run by a man named Tearjerker, played by Roger.
Goodbye, Professor. I'll weep for you.
Turns out the plot is to replace all the A-list actors with robots, so he can make them all do horrible films and ruin their careers. Now that joke holds up on so many levels. And it's up to Stan to stop him. Honestly, that's all you need to know. I mean, I could talk about these next 3 episodes for hours and not cover all the great things in them. This one is just a hilarious, clever, action-packed, well-paced, well-animated, adrenaline-rushing masterpiece. Oh, and you want to know why they call him Tearjerker? Because he'll make tears jerk out of your eyes from laughter. That and he kills people like this.
Oh boy, it's swell to say.
Number 2. Lost in Space. This is one episode that I really did not expect to like. So it says something that not only did I like it, I consider it one of the best American Dad episodes ever. This episode is a continuation of another episode called Naked to the Limit One More Time, which ended with Roger hurling Jeff into space. And this episode is about Jeff's time in outer space, and it's absolutely epic. Jeff ends up a prisoner in a space mall, and he shares a store with Sinbad.
So this is where you've been for the last 15 years.
What? I just got here 2 months ago.
Basically, the ruler of this mall doesn't believe in true love. In fact, when Jeff talks about his love for Haley and how he needs to get back to her, He has to take a test to prove it, but the test is actually rigged to only show Jeff's horrible memories with Haley. And it turns out that not only does failing this test mean you're in prison for life, you also lose a little something more.
This!
Oh, you cruel fucking bastard! Well, Jeff ends up discovering that the ruler is only doing this because he was heartbroken. By Roger. Hence why all this is happening in the first place. He's even in a cameo appearance Roger only causes suffering.
Oh my god, okay, wow. Can we please be grown-ups about this? Because I can't.
Honestly, this episode is just phenomenal. It's one of those risky episodes in my opinion, as it chose to not even include any of the other characters of American Dad, aside from a cameo from Haley and Roger. But it still works on so many levels. Now, while this episode has kind of a Star Wars feel to it, I really think it's more of its own thing. It's very original, it's very creative, and it's got one of the nicest messages about love I've ever seen. That heartbreak is gonna happen, so you can't let that hold you back from loving again. And that no true love is 100% perfect. In fact, it hints that true love is actually effort. It's appreciating the good and sticking through the bad. So I go as far as to call this episode one of their most well-executed and most well-meaning episodes, on top of being a risky chance to take. And the fact that this episode is still pretty recent, that shows me just how good this show really is.
I'm coming home, babe. I'm coming home.
What is your destination?
Take me to Earth so I can be with my beloved.
Now this is normally the part where I do honorable mentions, but instead, I thought I'd show you the episodes I'd rank 11 through 20. Like I said, there were about 100 episodes I could have chosen from. And I know that as this show goes on, there will be even more episodes that would probably be worthy of being in the top 20. But kinda like Futurama, I really don't think any of them will ever be better than this episode I've picked for my #1 favorite American Dad episode.
Oh boy, it's swell to say.
Number 1. Rapture's Delight. Yeah, this was the only Christmas episode I chose to include, because this really is, without a doubt, hands down, my all-time favorite American Dad episode. I remember watching this when it first aired, and it blew me away. It's one of the only episodes of any show that, once it was over, I rewound it to the very beginning and watched it again. This episode focuses on the rapture happening and Stan and Francine getting left behind. And after Stan tries to get raptured without Francine, she leaves him and ends up dating Jesus. And while this first half is filled with a lot of humor, like, for example, this line here when Francine leaves Stan.
Stan Smith? Go to heaven!
The second half of the episode takes place 3 years later, and it's actually portrayed as a very dark and gritty apocalypse story where Jesus enlists Stan's help to save Francine, who actually got captured by the Antichrist. And the Antichrist is where most of the humor in this second half comes from. He's a very clever rendition of how the Antichrist would actually be.
Condemn them, Mother! For they know exactly what they do! It's the opposite of forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do! Hello? I'm the Antichrist!
This episode is just flawless. It really is. It portrays both the humorous and serious side of what would happen when the rapture occurred. It shows how much Stan and Francine really care about each other. It's got a wonderful rendition of what heaven is like. And it even has a nice little twist at the end that kind of puts the whole show into a different perspective. Not only is it my all-time favorite American Dad episode, it's a top 10 favorite episode of any show ever for me. Hell, not even top 10, it's top 3. I love this episode, and it's one of the best episodes to watch if you really want a great idea of how spectacular American Dad is.
Merry Christmas, Mr. and Mrs. Jesus.
Alright guys, that'll do it for this list. And again, thank you so much for getting this channel to 5,000 subscribers. I mean, 5,000 is really something to be proud of, and I could never express how grateful I am for this. Also guys, happy month of October, the month of frights, scares, and disturbing imagery. I have a few Halloween specials in mind for this month, and what will the first one be? Well, it's a surprise, but I'll see you in my first Halloween special.